Let me catch you up to speed. There's a famine in the promised land. So a man named Elimelech took his wife Naomi and his 2 boys to Moab to find work. The boys both found wives there, but Elimelech and both boys died. No income, no job, no family. Naomi decides to go back to her native land, and one of her daughters-in-law, Ruth, goes with her. Chapter 3 begins this way, verse 1. One day, Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be well provided for." You know what that is? That is season 1200 BC of The Bachelorette. It is. And what's going on here is Naomi, she's playing matchmaker. Hear her words again. She says, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be well provided for." She's, in today's language, saying, "Ruth, you need a man." Next verse, verse 2. She gives Ruth some advice. She said, "Now Boaz, with whose women you have worked, is a relative of ours." She's saying, let's go after Boaz. He's a good catch. Now, an important point of clarification here for this chapter and actually for chapter 4, which we'll get to in the weeks ahead, a word we need to understand is this one. It's kinsman redeemer. You say, well, what is that? What does that mean? Well, let me get at that this way. Any NFL fans here? Okay, I'm going to give you a little trivia question. You see this guy here. Anybody know who this is? He's not the most famous football player. He's Kyle Allen. And Kyle is the second-string quarterback for the football team formerly known as the Washington Redskins. And you say, well, why is he important? Well, here's why he's important. He's important because the Washington football team has allowed more sacks than any other team per game, 5.5 sacks per game. And so their starting quarterback, Dwayne Haskins, this guy's like running for his life. If/when Dwayne Haskins goes down, this guy, Kyle Allen, he's the next man up. That's the basic concept for a kinsman redeemer. He's the backup quarterback. When a man got married, if he died before he produced an heir, well, the kinsman redeemer or the backup quarterback stepped in to do the job. That's explained in Deuteronomy chapter 25. The Bible explains it this way. It says, if brothers are living together and one of them dies without a son, his widow must not marry outside the family. Her husband's brother shall take her and marry her and fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to her. The duty. What is the duty? Kids, ask your parents. Okay? Well, here's what's going on. The passage, it continues, says, verse 2, now Boaz, and this is Naomi talking, with whose women you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight, he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. So this is a farming community, and this was harvest time. So harvest back then didn't mean, hey, fuel up the combine and let's go out to the field. No, they had to cut each stalk individually. And then they'd bring them in and they'd thresh and winnow. Well, what does that mean? Threshing was the process of separating the grain from the stalk. So they brought animals in, had the animals trample on the stalks, and then they took pitchforks and they threw it up in the air, and the wind would blow the stalks away, and then the heavy grain would fall down to the threshing floor. This was hard work. They were doing this all day. Well, Naomi, she knew that that's what Boaz had been doing. And so then she says these words to Ruth. She says, wash, put on perfume, get dressed in your best clothes. In other words, she's saying, Ruth, put on that new dress, get those highlights, get your nails done, put on your best heels. Ruth, it's cougar time. That's what's happening in chapter 3. and it's in your Bibles. Well, interesting passage. Chapter 3, verse 3 continues. Here's what happens next. Naomi says to Ruth, then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. I read that and think, well, hold on. Hold on. Did that say what I think it just said? Is this our hero? Is this Boaz? Is this our kinsman redeemer consuming alcohol? Yep, it is. Well, can he do that? Is that wrong? Is that sin? Some claim that drinking alcohol, that it's wrong, that good Christians don't do it. Well, if that's the case, then Jesus wasn't a very good Christian. Jesus, well, he drank wine. It was very common in the biblical times. It's not evil, but here's what it is. It's dangerous. What can happen? Too much alcohol, and you're sitting in your lazy boy, mumbling to yourself, watching Sunday night football in your underwear. If you end up doing that, you've had too much alcohol. Here's the guidelines that we see. One, not too much, don't get drunk. And then the other is, 21, follow the rules of God and the state. So Boaz, he's a God-honoring man. And he didn't get drunk, but after they did all this work and they brought the harvest in, he throws a big old party. Well, sometimes it's good for the people of God to party without sin, to get us all practiced up for the kingdom of heaven. Verse 4. Naomi, still talking to Ruth, she says, when he lays down, note the place where he is lying. And this was typical for a landowner to spend the night near the threshing floor to protect the harvest from theft. Goes on, then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do. Is that good advice? I mean, parents, would any of you tell your daughter to get all dolled up and then go to a man who's had a couple of drinks and climb into bed with him? That's bad advice. I don't think any of us would probably do that. Even if it's a godly man, we'd say, that is playing with fire. Don't do that. This is kind of an important thing to look at when we open up our Bibles. We do what's called interpretation. We interpret the things in the Bible. There are a few filters that are important for us to have as we read things. And here's one of them. Is this passage proscriptive or is this passage descriptive? They're different. Proscriptive means this is something that God is encouraging us, is instructing us, is commanding us to do. Descriptive is where God's just explaining the situation. He's saying, here's what was happening, here's what was going on, here's what they did. He's just describing it. So, here, chapter 3, she gets all dolled up, and she goes and she crawls into bed with him. What do you think? Proscriptive or descriptive? Yeah, descriptive. This is descriptive. So don't go doing this and pull out this verse and say, well, I got my Bible verse. No, not the idea. God's describing what's going on here. Verse 7, when Boaz finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. Ruth does what Naomi had suggested that she do. Here's what happens next, verse 8. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. He turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. Well, who are you? He asked. And that's a fair question. Here's the probable answer. A prostitute. That's who she most likely was. That's who showed up on the floor of the threshing floor on boys' night. Remember, this was payday. The harvest had just come in. The boys, they now had money in their pockets. All the boys who were staying at the threshing floor weren't God-honoring men. So here's Boaz. He's thinking that he's getting cozied up to by a prostitute. Verse 9. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth." He's like, "Whew, not a prostitute." He knows Ruth. He knows she's got godly character. Ruth says, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." Whoa. I think that sounds a little PG-13. What does it mean? What are Boaz's wings? Well, we get this phrase, spread your wings and spread the corner of your garment. What does that mean? What that does, that's referring back to the previous chapter. It's referring back to what happened in chapter 2. Let me refresh your memories. Chapter 2, verse 12, Boaz said this when he was talking to Ruth. He said, "May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Here's what's going on. These two passages, they're connected to each other. Boaz had, the passage before, prayed that God would take Ruth under his wings, that God would protect her, that God would provide for her. Well, here at the threshing floor, Ruth remembered that, and Ruth comes to Boaz saying, "Hey, Boaz, maybe you're the answer to that prayer. Boaz, protect me, provide for me, care for me." See, in Hebrew, there's one word here that means both of these things. The same Hebrew word for wings, it's the same word as the corner of the garment. And so in this passage, it's saying, pull the corner of your garment over me. That is another way of saying this. What we see here in chapter 3, this is a marriage proposal. Different culture, but that's what's going on. Ruth is saying, "Boaz, I want you to marry me. I want you to provide for me. I want you to protect me. I want you to take me into your care. I want to sleep in your bed under your wings as your wife." So Ruth is pretty upfront. How does Boaz respond to this? And put yourself in his situation. He's got a beautiful young woman who's emotionally attached to him, waiting and wanting to be his wife. What does he do? Well, how about say something like this? Well, let's give this relationship a test drive. Let's take it to the next level. Let's move in together. You know, that is understandable and maybe even feels logical in the world that we live in, and especially maybe if you're in a situation where you've experienced pain from divorce in your past or maybe your family's past. But the facts actually indicate the opposite. The facts indicate that people who live together before marriage end up having a much higher likelihood of breaking up during marriage. Psychology Today documented a finding by Yale University. Psychology Today, Yale University. These are not organizations that are promoting Christian values. But here's what they published. Cohabitating couples are 80% more likely to separate or divorce than couples who have not lived with their spouse before marriage. Yale University said that. That's what they concluded after doing some research. Cohabitating couples are 80% more likely to separate or divorce than couples who have not lived together with their spouse before marriage. If you aren't married, hear that. Hear that as wisdom. You know, this isn't about legalism or judgment at all. This is about God saying, "I want what's best for you." This is what's best for you. Well, Boaz, he's got a hot young woman in his room by his bed at night. What does he do? He recognizes this isn't about having a little fun. He recognizes that this is a life-altering decision, and he needs to decide, what do I believe? How will I live? What am I going to base my life upon? What am I going to base my actions on? Will I base my life on what I want? Will I base my life decisions on what this culture says is okay? Will I base my life decisions on what my hormones want? Will I base my life decisions on what I feel like? Or will I base the decisions on my life on my values and on my convictions? Whether it's a sexual thing or a financial thing, or if it's some kind of moral situation, in moments like these, here's the central question. For Boaz and for us, the question underlying these decisions is this: do I believe that God is good? Do I really, deeply believe that? Do I really believe that His way is the best way? Even if it's not what everyone else is doing, and even if it's difficult. When we're faced with these kind of turning points in our lives, no, this is what's at stake. Do I trust God with my life and with my choices? Got any turning points in your life today? Well, you know what Boaz did next? He does this. Verse 10, he says, "The Lord bless you, my daughter." You know, I love that little phrase, and I'm a little amused by it, because situation is this: Boaz, he's in bed, and Ruth, she's all done up, she's looking good. He's getting, a little bit physically attracted to her at this moment. What does he do? He starts talking about God. And I think that'll do it. That'll put the brakes on. That'll slow things way down. He just starts talking to God about God with her. Well, next is this, verse 14. So she lay at his feet until morning. Now, don't get in a tizzy when you hear that. Nothing physically inappropriate happened. Remember the situation. It's dark. It's harvest seasons. The boys have a few drinks in them. Boaz is saying, Ruth, don't walk home alone tonight. Be safe. Be smart. Don't put yourself in that dangerous position. Verse 14. So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized. And he said, no one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor. He said, we didn't do anything. I know that, and you know that, but I don't want anyone else to think that we did. And so he's protecting her here. He's protecting her honor. He's protecting her reputation. These verses in chapter 3, these can be wildly misinterpreted. Well, Ruth has appealed to Boaz to be her man. She's appealed to Boaz to be her kinsman redeemer. What does Boaz do? Verse 11. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. Boaz says yes. He says yes. He says, I will. I will do it. I will provide for you. I will carry you. I will marry you. And this is important here. I want us to look at this passage carefully, because this is where I think a whole lot of people get the biblical book of Ruth wrong. The NIV Study Bible, which is the one that I typically use, has a note in it that says this. I'm going to quote it. It says, Naomi's advice to Ruth is clearly for the purpose of appealing to Boaz's kinsman obligation. In other words, they're saying Boaz said yes because he was her kinsman redeemer. It was his duty, it was his responsibility, it was his obligation. Have you heard that book interpreted this way? Because here's what I think about that. I think that is wrong. I think that's just not true. Now, this is going to get a little hairy, And it's going to get a little bit technical, but hang in there with me because I think it changes our understanding of this passage. The prominent teaching about this passage in Ruth is that Boaz married Ruth to fulfill the marital responsibility of kinsman and redeemer that's found in Deuteronomy 25. Well, here's what I think we should do. We should probably look at Deuteronomy chapter 25, right? Kind of basic. Here's what Deuteronomy 25 tells us about the kinsman redeemer. It says, verse 5, if brothers are living together and one of them dies without a son, his widow must not marry outside the family. Her husband's brother shall take her and marry her and fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to her. Okay, it's important. It starts with if brothers. And then it says it again a little later. Her husband's brother. Question, who was Ruth married to? She was married in chapter 1 to Mahlon, the guy who died. So, was Boaz Mahlon's brother? No. Close relative, distant relative actually, distant relative, but not brother, which means Boaz was not the kinsman redeemer. Means Boaz, he had no duty, he had no responsibility, he had no obligation. And just in case we don't go back to study that in Deuteronomy 25, we can get a glimpse of it even in Ruth chapter 3. Hear it in verse 12. Boaz says, although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there is another who is more closely related than I. Boaz is not the closest relative. Boaz is not the kinsman redeemer. Some other man is legally bound. Some other man should be the kinsman redeemer. So despite what you may have heard, Boaz has no legal obligation to Ruth whatsoever. Boaz owes Ruth nothing. Some will say, well, Boaz, he's fulfilling his kinsman redeemer obligation from Deuteronomy 25. No, no, he's not. He's not a brother. He's not having to do that. He's not marrying her to obey the law. Here's why this is important. He's not marrying her to fulfill his duty. This is important because he's not doing this to fulfill some kind of legal responsibility. He's not legally obligated to do anything. So why? The question we should be asking then is why? Why did he do this? Why did he do what he did? Why did he marry her? One reason. He married her because he loved her. This isn't duty. This isn't obligation. And if we don't get that, then we miss the main point of this whole story. Boaz didn't have to. Boaz wasn't obligated to. Boaz, this guy, he chose to. And I'm wondering, is that starting to sound a little bit familiar? Because this story isn't in the Bible just to tell us about Boaz and Ruth. This story is in the Bible because God, He wants to tell us about His relationship with us. Probably the most famous Bible verse in the entire Bible is this one. It's John 3:16. I'm going to invite you to read this with me. Join me. For God so loved the world that He gave His one and only Son, that whoever believes in Him shall not perish, but have eternal life. Notice, that doesn't say, well, God was so obligated to this world that out of duty, He gave His one and only Son. Doesn't say that. Right? What does it say? It says, God, well, He loved. He loved. That was God's motivation. That's what was going on inside of God. That's what was driving our God, and it still is. Remember the awkward phrase in this passage? The phrase, well, it's to spread the corner of your garment. Did you know that exact same phrase is found in another place in the Bible? It's obscure, but check it out. Ezekiel chapter 16, and this time, it's God, and He's speaking to us. I spread the corner of my garment over you and covered your naked body. I gave you my solemn oath and entered into a covenant with you, declares the sovereign Lord. He's saying, this is the sovereign God saying this. This is the Holy One. This is the awesome God who is the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega. He is saying this. He's saying this. This is the kind of relationship I want to have with you. I spread the corner of my garment over you and covered your naked body. I gave you my solemn oath and entered into covenant with you, declares the sovereign Lord, and you became mine. You became mine. You recognize what this is? This is marriage language. This is marriage language. God is talking about a vow, and God is offering a covenant, and He's using marriage language with who? With you, with me. He's saying this is the kind of relationship I want to have with my people right here in this book. It's a vow, it's a covenant from God to us. You know, when we say, God, I see who you are in Jesus, and I need you. I need what you did on the cross for the forgiveness of my sins. I need that. God, would you pull the corner of your blanket over me? Would you put me under your wings? I want to follow you. I choose to put my trust in you. When we do that, then here's what happens. God is saying, I am making a covenant with you. I am going to love you with a perfect love. I will be with you always. I will provide for you. I will protect you. I will take you for better, for worse, for richer, for poor, in sickness and in health. I will be faithful to you. I will be true to you. He's saying, I will put you under my wings. You can count on me. That's what God's saying to us. You know, Boaz, he didn't have to. He chose to. And so does God. Is there anything right now that's causing you in your life today to question God's love or God's faithfulness or God's commitment to you? Get rid of it. It's a lie. Let's close by reading these words from God together from Ezekiel 16, verse 8. This is God. He's speaking to you and to me. Join me. I spread the corner of my garment over you and covered your naked body. I gave you my solemn oath and entered into a covenant with you, declares the sovereign Lord, and you became mine.